The thing you're most proud of about yourself is probably the thing most worth questioning. That quality you've built your identity around, the one people compliment you on, the one you'd name. If someone asked what makes you different, there's a very good chance it didn't develop because it's who you really are. It developed because something inside you was so unacceptable, so intolerable to the version of you that needed to survive, that your psyche built an entire personality on top of it, just to make sure no one, including you, would ever see it. Your greatest strength isn't necessarily a lie, but it might be a monument built over something you buried alive. This video is going to show you exactly how that burial works, what it costs you on a daily basis, and how to start reclaiming what you lost without dismantling what you've built. By the end, you'll understand a mechanism that explains more about your behavior, your relationships, and your recurring frustrations than almost anything else in psychology. And you'll have one tool to begin using tonight. If this kind of clarity is what you come here for, the kind that doesn't soften the truth but makes it useful, then staying subscribed means this perspective keeps showing up when you need it. Here's the story most people have been told about their personality. You're born with certain tendencies. Life shapes them. You develop strengths and weaknesses. And your job, according to basically every self-help framework on the market, is to lean into the strengths and fix the weaknesses. It sounds reasonable. It's also structurally wrong, because it assumes your strengths and weaknesses are neutral descriptions of what you're naturally good at and naturally bad at. They're not. Many of the traits you think of as your core personality aren't reflections of who you are. They're reactions to who you were afraid of being. The person who's proud of being endlessly patient didn't necessarily arrive on Earth with a calm temperament. They may have learned very early that their anger was dangerous, that expressing frustration got them punished or abandoned or shamed. So the psyche did what it does. It didn't just suppress the anger. It built an entire identity around the opposite. Patience became a virtue. Composure became a brand. And the anger didn't disappear. It went underground, where it's been running the show in ways that person has never once connected to their so-called patience. This is the real problem. You're not struggling because you have weaknesses you haven't fixed. You're struggling because you've mistaken compensation for identity. And the more you invest in the compensated trait, the more pressure builds beneath it. Think of it like a house built on a foundation that has a room sealed off in the basement. You didn't choose to seal it. It was sealed before you were old enough to make that kind of decision. But everything you've built since then, every floor, every wall, every room you're proud of, sits on top of that sealed space. The house looks fine, it might even look impressive, but there's a pressure building in the basement that you can feel in every room without ever knowing where it's coming from. The floorboards creak in patterns you can't explain. Certain rooms feel heavier than others, for reasons that don't make sense. And every once in a while, something cracks, and a wave of emotion or behavior comes through that doesn't match the person you believe yourself to be. Then you patch it and move on and tell yourself it was stress. Carl Jung called that sealed room the shadow, not evil, not your dark side in the way pop culture has flattened the idea into something cartoonish. The shadow is everything about you that was incompatible with the identity you needed to construct in order to be safe, loved, and accepted in your specific environment. It includes rage, yes, but it also includes grief, desire, ambition, sexuality, tenderness, selfishness, power, and vulnerability. Whatever your particular world told you was not okay, that's what went into the room. The shadow isn't your worst self. It's your unedited self. Every quality that couldn't survive the social environment you grew up in got pushed down, and a corresponding opposite trait got pushed up and polished until it became the thing you call your personality. Neuroscience has started mapping how this actually works inside the brain. When a child repeatedly receives social punishment, whether overt like anger or covert like withdrawal of affection, for a specific type of emotional expression, the prefrontal cortex begins building inhibitory patterns around that expression. That's not a metaphor. The brain literally develops stronger neural pathways for suppression of that particular impulse, and stronger pathways for the behavior that got rewarded instead. Over time, the suppression becomes automatic. You don't feel yourself doing it anymore. The compensated behavior starts to feel natural. It starts to feel like you. And here's the part that makes this mechanism so difficult to see. The compensation works. The person who buried their anger and built patience on top of it genuinely functions well in many situations. People respect them. They get promoted. They're the calm one in the crisis. The reward signal from the environment keeps reinforcing the compensated trait, which keeps strengthening the neural pathway, which keeps making the buried quality harder to access. The system is self-reinforcing. The better the compensation works socially, the deeper the original quality gets buried. Which means the people who are most successful at compensation are often the most disconnected from themselves. Their personality is a performance that's been running so long, the performer forgot they're on stage. This is where it gets expensive, because what you suppress doesn't sit quietly. The amygdala and limbic system don't care about your identity narrative. They're still generating the emotional responses you sealed away. Every time a situation triggers the buried quality, your brain has to spend energy suppressing it and generating the compensated response instead. This is measurable. Studies on emotional suppression show elevated cortisol, reduced working memory, and decreased emotional clarity. You're not just hiding something. You're running a constant background process that drains cognitive resources you don't even realize you're losing. That chronic fatigue you can't explain, that feeling of being slightly disconnected from your own life, that recurring sense that something is off even when everything looks right, this is often where it comes from. You're spending half your processing power maintaining a personality that was built to protect you from yourself. Jung wrote that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. He arrived at this through decades of clinical observation, watching patient after patient present with symptoms that were, at their root, the exact qualities they'd spent a lifetime denying. The science has caught up. Suppressed emotional content doesn't decay. It consolidates. The neural networks associated with a suppressed trait remain active and actually strengthen through the very act of being suppressed, because suppression requires the brain to continuously monitor for the thing it's trying to block. You're keeping it alive by fighting it. So here's where most people are standing, and there's a good chance one of these two positions sounds uncomfortably familiar. The first trap is total identification with the compensated trait. You've built your entire self-concept around being the patient one, the strong one, the independent one, the easygoing one, the one who doesn't need much. And any suggestion that this trait might not be purely authentic feels like an attack on your identity. you don't just resist the idea. You can't even see what it's pointing at, because seeing it would mean the thing you've built your life around isn't solid ground. It's a reaction. People in this trap often feel a flash of irritation right now, reading this. That irritation is information. The second trap is the opposite. You've already glimpsed the shadow. Maybe through a breakdown, a relationship that fell apart in a way you couldn't explain, a moment where you behaved so far outside your self-concept that it shook you. And now you're afraid of it. You've seen what's in the basement, and you've decided the right move is to seal it tighter. More discipline, more control, more doubling down on the compensated identity. People in this trap often look the most put together from the outside because their entire operating system is organized around containment. Both traps share the same structural error. They both treat the shadow as the enemy. The narrow path between these traps isn't about destroying what you've built. It's not about burning down the patience or the strength or the independence you've developed. Those traits have served you. They may even be partially genuine. The path is about removing the seal on the basement, not because what's down there is going to save you, but because as long as it's sealed, everything above it is unstable. When you acknowledge what you've buried, something shifts. The compensated trait doesn't disappear. It gets honest. The patience that was covering rage becomes patience that exists alongside the capacity for anger. The independence that was covering a desperate need for connection becomes independence that can also ask for help. The trait stops being a mask and starts being a choice. And that's the difference between a personality that runs you and a personality you actually inhabit. Here's what you do tonight. Pick the quality you're most identified with. The one you'd put on a business card if personalities had business cards. Patient, logical, independent, easygoing, strong, generous. Whatever it is, write it down. Now ask one question. What is the opposite of this trait? And when was the last time I was allowed to be that? Not when was the last time I was that accidentally in a moment of breakdown. When was the last time I gave myself permission? If the answer is never, or if the question itself creates a physical reaction, tightness in the chest, a desire to dismiss the exercise, a sudden need to check your phone, you've found the room. You don't have to open the door tonight. That's not the move. The move is just knowing where the door is. Because the moment you can see it, the moment you can name the thing your entire personality was built to hide, the suppression loses its automatic grip. Neuroscience is clear on this. Conscious recognition of a suppressed emotional pattern reduces amygdala reactivity and shifts processing toward the prefrontal cortex, where you can actually make choices instead of running on autopilot. Naming the shadow doesn't give it power. It gives you power. The quality that's been running you from underneath can only run you in the dark. You don't need to become the opposite of who you've been. You don't need to tear anything down. You need to stop pretending the basement doesn't exist. That's it. That's the entire move. One honest look at what you built your identity on top of. And here's what happens when you do. The fatigue gets lighter. Not all at once, but noticeably, because you're no longer spending energy suppressing something every waking moment. The floorboards stop creaking. The rooms in the house start feeling like they actually belong to you, not like something you're performing to maintain. Your relationships shift because you're no longer unconsciously attracting situations that poke at the sealed room. You stop being blindsided by your own reactions. You stop saying, "I don't know why I did that," because you do know. You finally do. This was never about fixing yourself. The premise was wrong from the start. You weren't broken, you were split. One half of you was on stage, polished and performing. The other half was in the dark, sealed away, still very much alive, growing stronger by the year. The work isn't healing, the work is reunion. You're not learning who you should be. You're meeting who you already are. The traits you're proud of don't have to be lies, but they have to be choices. And a choice you made when you were too young to know there were other options isn't really a choice at all. Tonight, you find out what was sealed. Tomorrow, you start choosing for real. The strongest version of you isn't the one with the best compensation. It's the one with nothing left to hide from.